Peace family. Such an incredible honor to be with you all tonight at the launching of this life transformative, beautiful, radical program. We made the journey from Soulfire Farm, Mohican Territory, upstate New York, 8 hours yesterday to come to this rocky shore. It's a place I've never been before, and truly, truly a blessing to stand on these sacred lands and to be with all of you. And excited to do a little bit of storytelling about the intersection of food, justice, and the carceral state. So I'll start a bit with our own story at Soulfire Farm. Jonah and I were living in the south end of Albany, New York, with our then young children. Nashima was 2, Emmett was 2 weeks old. And the south end of Albany is a neighborhood under food apartheid. There were no supermarkets, there were no farmers markets, there was no available land or community garden plot, there was no bus line to get to the supermarket. And when I tried to use my WIC coupons in the bodega, I held up the line and somebody spit on me. I wasn't the only one experiencing the difficulty of getting fresh, healthy, nourishing food to my children. Our neighbors were similarly struggling. As are people all across Turtle Island, food apartheid is an insidious system of segregation that relegates certain people to food opulence while others are relegated to food scarcity. It's why there's disproportionate burden of diabetes and hypertension and kidney failure in Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. And it's from a legacy of redlining, of restrictive covenants that zone certain areas for people of color and others for everyone else, because of urban renewal, and because of legacies of institutional racism. And so when our neighbors found out that Jonah and I both had over a decade of farming experience under our belt, they said, well, half joking, when are you gonna start a farm for the people? When are you gonna start a farm for us? And you know, like many young farmery folks, you have the dream of one day, you know, getting the land and building your house and like eking a living out of the hillsides. But we started to take that really seriously. What would it be to start a farm whose mission was solely about feeding our people and treating food as a human right rather than a commodity or something, a privilege reserved for the few? And so we, long story short, wed ourselves to this 80 acres of land way up in the mountains of Mohican Territory back in 2007, and spent 4 years building the highly degraded soil, building a home, putting in the septic, the electric, the road, all of that. And then the very first program that we opened, of course, was a doorstep delivery of free and low-cost food into the south end of Albany. And so we were feeling pretty good about this, you know, it's like made a huge difference. Our members were telling us if it wasn't for this, I'd be eating ramen. Now my children are eating fresh vegetables, my cholesterol's gone down, you know, all of this. But a few years into the farm, got a visit from this wonderful mentor and elder of mine, Baba Curtis Muhammad, who passed away just last year. And he's a Black Panther civil rights activist, really incredible contributions to the rights that many of us enjoy today that we didn't just a generation ago. And so I was telling him this story, I was really excited, and he said, well, you know what Black farmers were doing in the civil rights movement? I didn't. He said there quite literally would be no civil rights movement without Black farmers. If you're gonna go ride down for Freedom Summer, they're not gonna put you up in some hotel or let you dine at the local restaurant, right? They're not gonna let you meet in their churches. The only place where people could organize was on Black-owned land. And so the meeting places, the armed protection, the food, the shelter, even the collateral to get folks bailed out of jail came from the Black farming community. And he said, so what, you're delivering carrots? Oh, that's cute. What are you doing to get us free? What are you doing to get us free? And we took that really seriously because while survival programs can't be understated, we're in this for a long game, and we're in this for true empowerment and true leadership of all people who've been dispossessed. And so we got involved with the Freedom Food Alliance, and there's actually a beautiful Maine connection to this. I don't know if you all know political prisoner Herman Bell, who was recently released after 40 years of incarceration for his role in the Black Panther Party. And while he was incarcerated, he collaborated to co-found the Victory Gardens project in central Maine, which was focused on sustainability and self-sufficiency through growing food in impoverished communities. And they provided for their own community. They provided food boxes to folks who were inside, and they also built entrepreneurial skills through the program. So my friend Jalal and some of my other radical farmer friends were mentees of Herman Bell and started the Freedom Food Alliance because the Department of Corrections in New York State in 2011 had stopped giving rides between New York City and the upstate prisons. So there was literally no way for most families to see their loved ones. So we had the Victory Bus Project, named after Victory Gardens, Herman Bell's project in Maine, and started providing these rides to Sing Sing and the other upstate prisons. But along with your ride, you stopped at a farm like Soul Fire Farm upstate and got a box of vegetables, one to take home and one to go ahead and deliver to folks inside. And there was political education. Folks were reading like Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow on the bus. And, you know, upstate had been associated only with prisons. So to actually have a farm experience was really radical for people. We also taught farm entrepreneurial courses inside. But most importantly and closest to my heart is we took that one step further and started working with Albany County Department of Corrections to create a diversion program. Because the youth carceral state and the school to prison pipeline, like most places in upstate New York, it's horrendous. I mean, young Black men in particular, if they're truants or considered incorrigible, they're very quickly fast-tracked into juvenile detention. And so I have a great friend who's a prosecutor on the inside, and she was seeing this, and she said, you know, I think I can get some change if you would just be willing to pilot a diversion program, and we can prove to these people who are skeptical that there's something else to do with these young people besides put them in juvenile detention. And so she's amazing. I mean, she got legislation passed in order to get this diversion program and the judges, everybody on board. But the way it basically worked is that the young people could come participate in a specialized leadership program on our farm, earn money, pay restitution to their, quote, victims. And I have an analysis about that. But then, you know, take money home, take food home, build leadership, all of this. And, on the very first day of the program, we had 5 in our initial cohort. And I remember Hassan and Ben and 3 others, you know, they got out of the van, they looked around and they were like, are y'all slaves? And then they said, if y'all are slaves, is this like better or worse than prison? Which is funny and also fair, you know, because, and we're going to take a little historical detour here because, you know, as we've already started to talk about, the history of the carceral state and the history of industrial agriculture are pretty intertwined. You know, as my friend Chris Bolden Newsome, who's a farmer in Philly, would say, land was the scene of the crime. Land was the scene of the crime. We can talk about the 12.5 million African people who were kidnapped from their homes and forced into chattel slavery as the original mass incarceration, forced to work native lands, mostly unceded territories, to build the backbone of our economy in this nation. We can talk about the very first police forces in the United States were formed in North Carolina in 1704. They were slave patrols. This police force was nationalized in 1793 with the Fugitive Slave Act, which made it legal to go capture both escaped slaves, but also free Black people and force them back into incarceration in the southern states. We can talk about the so-called abolishment of slavery in 1865 when the 13th Amendment was passed, but it had a handy little loophole that made it legal to still incarcerate people if convicted of a crime. And an explosion of new laws came on the books after 1865 called the Black Codes, which made it suddenly illegal to hang out with 3 people if you were Black. That's called loitering. It was suddenly illegal to be unemployed, specifically not to have a year-long contract on a farm. That's called vagrancy. It was illegal to not be upright and honest and industrious. The crime for not being upright, or the punishment for not being upright and industrious, was to have your children taken away and apprenticed to their former masters to learn industry. And so the prisons filled with Black people, doubling and tripling the population of Black folks in most southern states, who were then in turn leased back to the plantation, the mines, and the railroads through convict leasing, which was not a minor footnote in history, right? In 1898, 78% of Alabama's state budget came from leasing Black people back to plantations, right? This was very significant and continues to this day, by the way. And so, this continued on even after the end formally of the Black codes during the civil rights movement. A lot of the farm programs were sharpened into weapons to punish civil rights activities. So if you go as a farmer, a Black farmer, to the USDA office to get the same loan that the white farmer just got to put irrigation in the middle of a drought, but you had been seen trying to register to vote or join the NAACP, your application would be ripped up right in front of your face. Read Pete Daniels' book, Dispossession, on that. Or look into the Pigford case. Similarly, sharecroppers who had organized for their rights were punished with near starvation during the Greenwood food blockade in 1962, when 20,000 Black sharecroppers were prevented from getting food aid because of the audacity to try to register to vote. Right, and it goes on. We're in the age of mass incarceration, and still, prison labor is a $40 billion a year industry, people working for free or no money for corporations, and for farms. And during the pandemic, prison labor on farms, unpaid prison labor on farms, took a huge jump. So in my state of New York, in upstate New York, this is particularly close to home because the rural economy, which used to be primarily agriculture, especially dairy farming, is now primarily prison, private and state prisons. The price supports were removed, which made farming not viable. And the draconian drug laws created huge demand to create more prison beds. And so all of these rural politicians have huge incentives to keep that system going of like putting more people incarcerated, because now everyone's relying on those prisons, for their jobs. It's sometimes the only job in some of those counties in upstate New York, to the point where in New York and also nationwide, we now have more prisoners than we do farmers. We have more incarcerated people in this country than we have people growing food. So it is not an exaggeration to say that the history of industrial agriculture is the history of the prison system. So we come back to Hassan and Ben and these young people on the farm who are like, are you all slaves? Is this just like incarceration? It's a fair question. Of course, we work with them. It's not uncommon. I've worked with youth for almost 20 years, and especially for young Black and Indigenous youth, that type of fatalism is a form of internalized racism. They are so used to seeing their family and community with premature death as a reality. And they think it's either going to be the bullet, it's going to be incarceration. So why do I need to think about healthy food? Like, what is even the point? Why would I think about entrepreneurship? I can't count on my own future. But it is through relationship to land and relationship to people who truly care that healing starts to happen. They get to grow flowers and make a bouquet for their mom. They get to fix burritos for each other, learn how to carve a bow and arrow. My son Emmett, at the time we started this program, was about 9 and like a really cute, sweet little brother figure for them. And I remember them all starting to work on carving and doing some archery. And one of the most sort of incredulous, standoffish kids, Hassan, actually stole a cell phone while he was at the farm. And, understandable, but still not okay. And the skeptics who had reluctantly agreed to this pilot program took that as an opportunity to think that they should call it all off. They were like, you know what? This just doesn't, see, these kids, right? You can't trust them. We said, give us a chance to do our process. And so because of shame, once found out, Hassan didn't come back to the program the next day. But Emmett called him up. Emmett called him up, my little 9-year-old kid, and said, I really miss you. And you promised that we were going to finish our bow and arrow and we were going to play together. And like through literal tears is asking this child, like, please come back. And he did. He did. He came back because he mattered to somebody. He came back because he mattered to somebody. And we finished out the week and we do the things we do. We tell stories of history and we engage them in the political process. We're part of the New York Prisoner Justice Coalition. And so they got to do their policy priorities and learn how to plant turnips and all this stuff. And meanwhile, the suits, of course, are still not super psyched about this. And they want to come on the last day of the program with their clipboards and like evaluate these children. And I was saying, how would that feel to you to kind of be farming and be watched and kind of evaluated? And they were like, not great. I said, well, how can we flip this? Like, what can we do to culminate and really show them what you've done and sort of check off this box, but do it in a way that's dignified? And they said, well, what if we taught them how to farm? And so we told them to bring their boots and their gloves. And so the judges and the prosecutors and the lawyers and all of these folks have to come out to the farm and take direction from these system-involved youth on how to plant turnips. And boy, were they exacting. They were like, oh, no, 1 inch apart. I told you how to measure an inch. You place and you do and you pat down. And we're able to really demonstrate with pride, some of these skills that they learned. And I'm very happy to say that the pilot we did a 3-year pilot. It was successful. And now, Albany County permanently has this diversion program so that young people can do something other than go into jail. They can do leadership programs, which is wonderful. And also why it's so important to me and so beautiful to me to be amongst all of you who see the humanity of all of us. Right? And see how important it is to treat food as a human right, to treat folks, whether they're inside or outside, as full, sacred human beings with not just potential, but actual intrinsic value in this moment. And that you see the importance of addressing these intersecting issues of racial justice, of land sovereignty, and of food access. And so I want to just take my hat off, 3 bows to each of you for committing your time, your financial resources, your heart, your talent to this really sacred and important project. And with all sincerity, I really wish you the best. And I hope that we continue to collaborate. I do want to close with one of my favorite poems. This is from my friend Ross Gay. And for those, just context to understand the poem. So for those who aren't aware, Eric Garner was murdered by police just a few years back, and his last words were, "I can't breathe." A small needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for the Parks and Rec Horticultural Department, which means perhaps, in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants, which most likely, some of them, in all likelihood, continue to grow. Continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe. Thank you.